Hey, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining from today. My name is Jason Brand. I'm the Director of Outreach and Partner Development here at Supply Chain Solutions. And if you're a returning viewer to our weekly ship show, thank you so much for joining us today and tuning in. If you're new to our show, big thanks for joining us as well. So I represent Supply Chain Solutions. We provide our customers with truly a one-stop shop for your logistics needs. And that really includes end-to-end services to more than 160 different countries that we deliver to and from every year. And that's not to mention our new and improved expansive warehouse network and our integrated technology solutions, which essentially bundle our transportation management systems, our inventory management systems, our document management systems, which includes our customs management and our data management tools all into one custom sign on for you and your team. We can actually break it down by what level individual in your organization you want to see what to keep everyone focused, everything clean, and just operations humming smoothly. It's really cool. We're very excited about it. Please give us a call because we'd love to talk to you about it. It's a very exciting investment for us that we've been working on for, really our entire life, but it's really coming to a point now, and it's at great timing. Anyway, as a reminder for our returning guests, we've got a format we like to keep here, specifically on our Freight Market Roundup episodes. And we do this to make sure that we're pretty easy to follow along with. There's a lot of information. We want to make sure it's digestible. So I'm going to quick run through kind of the agenda allowed. So first things first, we're going to start with our major trade lanes. It's going to be the Trans-Pacific lanes first, so our Southeast Asia and China lanes coming into the U.S. West Coast. Then we're going to move over to our transatlantic lanes, so our shipments coming from Europe coming into the U.S. East Coast. And then finally, we're going to flip the globe on the other side, take a look at what's going on in China, between China, Southeast Asia, and the shipments going over to Europe through the Suez. Between each of these sections, what we want to do is we want to talk about some current events. And these are specific to things our team is watching and worried about or just needs to make sure we're monitoring, and also situations that our customers are dealing with and asking us questions about. We want to bring all that to the surface so everyone can learn a little bit and make sure they understand what's going on in the world of logistics, because there's a lot of stuff happening literally every week. A lot of companies trying to figure it out. And with all the regulation, you need a law degree to keep up. So anyways, let's get going. We got a ton of ground to cover, and I want to apologize in advance. I was trying to trim out, there's a lot of data we're going to go through today, and I really tried to trim a lot of it out. And the reason why is, if you're just speaking numbers, it can be a little bit hard to, follow and put that mental picture together. But at some points, it's a little raw. So I apologize. If you got any questions, if you want to know a little bit more, please reach out to me. I can send you some of the source material. On top of that, if you'd love to talk to our team because there's a situation you're concerned about, reach out as well. This is what we love to do. Okay, so our Southeast Asia, our China coming into the U.S. West Coast. Let's talk about those rates. So as a reminder, these are just the ocean rates. We're not going to talk about the inland portions. And what I mean by that is if you're shipping door to door or if you're shipping FOB, your shipments are going to be more expensive. So don't be alarmed. Now, that being said, you should be able to look at your invoices and actually identify the cost of your ocean shipping. And if you can't do that, you need to find a better provider. And, really, most providers should show you those line items. But, what we love to do is we've got this novel idea of having an open book policy. So for our contractual customers, our customers literally see what we pay for freight and what we pay ourselves. And this novel idea is just that our customers, we can provide them with the cleanest data so they can make the best market decisions based off of how they're shipping. It's a very cool idea. If you're interested in that, you definitely have to reach out as well. It's also a great time. There's people either spending too much on shipping right now or really winning in the market. So you want to really want to be winning in the market at this point. Anyway, back to our Trans-Pacific lane. So if you've been following along with the show, we've discussed how it's been pretty rocky, but that's pretty usual. We're definitely seeing a spread between shipping prices. And what I mean by this is especially when we're comparing the carriers on the exact same lane right now, what they're offering is all over the board. It's very, very interesting. So we're locking in ocean rates currently at around 1,400 a TEU, and that's our average from last week. Now, remember, the U.S. West Coast, we're getting a slight volume boost from the unrest happening in the Canadian ports at the moment and the fear of the strike that's coming up right now, potentially just this weekend or next week. So keep that in mind. But 1400 was our average for last week. And given that these, Canadian port talks are really coming to a flashpoint, you should expect this rate to continue rising, but likely it will not rise as much as it could have in the past. And by the past, I don't mean pandemic, I mean pre-pandemic. So let's, put a pin in that idea for a second. But if you were with us for the last show, we were talking about what's going on with the Teamsters. And it's critical we start talking about this because Yellow, we kind of pushed a little bit of that content to this week just because a lot was happening at the moment. And it's really for a good reason. So just last week, Saturday, Yellow missed their second payment to the Teamsters pension fund. And this is a really big deal. So they notified the leadership of the Teamsters. They wrote this letter to the divisions of the Teamsters. They posted it online. And really, the issue here is Yellow and Holland owed $50 million in healthcare and pension contributions to cover their June and July payments. And the first payment was due on June 15th. That second payment was due on July 15th, just last Saturday. Now, quite frankly, this is seemingly the final moments of a very long fight so far this year and beyond of Yellow really trying to prevent this, the pandemic funds, the pandemic lifelines that were sent out. They're really trying to make sure that doesn't become a nail in their coffin at this point. So the trucking company, they have $1.3 billion in long-term debt at the moment. And that is including this financial lifeline, which was $700 million, which was a US Treasury loan. And that's going to be coming due next year. The debt payments, the interest, they're eating into the company's liquidity. Now, what was happening last week, and the reason why, if you were on the show, I mentioned stuff is going on, we need to postpone this. Well, there was a little glimmer of hope. And we saw that the creditors, which included the US government, decided to give Yellow more time to focus on restructuring the company, which they've been trying to do since roughly early spring of this year, and also time to help them resolve that labor dispute that's been going on with the Teamsters. And in exchange, what the US government, what the creditors wanted was some really intense oversight into the company's financials and really unprecedented access into their books. So, this deal, though, it was struck before the announcement by Yellow that they weren't going to be paying the pensions and they weren't going to be making the contributions to the healthcare plan. And what's happened here is it just gave the business community and people that have been shipping. And so, for example, I apologize if I didn't make this clear, and maybe you don't use Yellow, but this is very focused on LTL shipping. But this announcement of this second missed payment, it just put a really bad gut feeling in the business community and the shippers in general. And that's, obviously optimism. Economic optimism is extremely important when you're dealing with these economies in these markets and these economies of scale, because if there's a large shift, that would crush a company or that crush an area. And unfortunately, that's that bad gut feeling has kind of started a series of dominoes. So this isn't the real nail in the coffin, though, for Yellow. There's been a lot of very public concerns about the company. And one big thing has been their just rapidly dropping liquidity. So if you look back in December 31st, their liquidity was at $241.8 million. If you fast forward just 3 months, and this came amidst a lot of news around Yellow trying to restructure, close some certain locations, and kind of just, cleanse their operations a little bit. So 3 months later, at December 31st, they were at $241.8 million. By March 31st, they were valued at, or liquidity was at $167.5 million. The vultures are definitely beginning to circle on this account. And, we've seen it personally. Their customer base is already scrambling to find alternatives. And, with this second missed pension payment, and this is a nail in the coffin, the Teamsters essentially said this warrants a strike. And so if a deal is not reached by the end of the month, they will strike. Really, really, really hard combination of things. And actually, it's not even the end of the month. It's just the 24th. So you've got to keep this in mind. And we've got a lot of brutal realities coming to U.S. shippers, and they're going to come to this kind of, flashpoint, a lot of flashpoints coming on. Apologize for the reuse of that word, but it's true. So you really need to find an alternative if you're going to be shipping LTL, because the risks were bad last week, and given just this 1 week bit of current events, it's looking extremely ugly. So keep that in mind. Now, all that being said, this bad news period for yellow does seem to have kind of caused a silver lining, and that's in the talks between the Teamsters and UPS. They have resumed. Now, this return to the bargaining table, it's very, very, very clear. There's a paper trail that shows it was UPS extending the olive branch. The Teamsters made an announcement saying UPS is bowing, they want us to come back. UPS said, hey, we want you to come back, all publicly. And again, we talked about this last week, a very big difference between these union negotiations and what we've seen at the ILWU on the West Coast, also up in Canada, and a little bit about what's been going on, definitely East Coast, but it's changing. We'll talk about that in a moment. Is that those port authority and those longshoremen unions are key on media blackouts. On the flip side, the Teamsters and these union negotiations, they hit the media hard. And so, you can get really caught in the whiplash of some of the extremely loaded, ways of communicating these things and kind of leaving the facts a little bit behind. But that being said, UPS did reach out, and to be entirely honest, it is the willingness of the Teamsters to return to the bargaining table is undoubtedly due to them seeing the writing on the wall for yellow. There's definitely a portion of their leadership that says yellow's a lost cause. We need to salvage UPS at some level right now. That being said, remember, we talked about this last week. They're pretty far off in what the Teamsters want and what UPS is willing to pay. And when they left off last, UPS was digging in their heels saying, we are extremely competitive with our wages. And Teamsters were saying, we gave you concessions in the past, which they also had that issue with yellow. But they said, we gave you concessions in the past. This is your year to pay up. So it is going to be a little bit of an interesting month for LTL. I do expect, though, because of the situation at yellow, the UPS situation likely, well, at least has a higher likelihood of finding some resolution. Let's shift gears. Let's talk about the transatlantic. So remember, transatlantic ocean portion. We're focusing on that ocean portion, not the inland portions, just the ocean. Remember, if you've got your invoice, make sure you're locating that ocean portion piece so you're comparing your rate apples to apples. So 2 weeks ago, actually 3 weeks back, I mentioned that we had some major rate softening that was taking place in the U.S. East Coast since the start of the year. But with that softening, we found a floor. For months, we were seeing this price that was sitting at a very stable $2,100. But somehow rates have managed to fall even farther. And now, personally, I really truly felt that given the challenges with the East Coast, and even with their contract renewal challenges, I really didn't think the lane was going to fall much further. And there's been a lot of articles about the new cost of shipping coming into the East Coast. Obviously, there is the inflationary pressures that have, obviously increased the cost of everything. But on top of that, during the pandemic, there was so much infrastructure improvement that happened on the East Coast. They had to become a critical coast because at the same time, just last year, we were dealing with this ILWU situation where we saw it in advance. We knew the last negotiation went bad. Everyone shifted over to the East Coast. When rates plummeted on the West Coast, they stayed elevated on the East Coast. We started out this year with the rate that was 4 times higher, more than 4 times higher than a high rate in 2019. So really, it was the lane that was just, would not give up. And as a result of that, the data that the East Coast was seeing through the pandemic gave them confidence to put a lot of money into building warehouses, expanding terminals, creating more deep areas so larger ships can come in. But we really thought that 2,100 was going to be the floor, but no. So coming to our price, we watched $2,100 over the past 3 weeks, technically 2 weeks, because we're looking at last week's averages, drop by $400 more. And it's mind-blowing to me. So now we're literally sitting in the 1,700 range, high 1,700s at that, but still 1,700 range. And we are a stone's throw away from pre-pandemic rates with post-pandemic costs, which is just mind-boggling. like everything in logistics, there are a ton of factors feeding into this. We try to touch on some each week. We've been discussing just what's going on with demand in general and the effects it's had across, all of the ports. I'd love to, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with this, but there was a great article that came out, albeit a misleading article, in my opinion, talking about how it's not a freight collapse, it's just a return to normalcy. If you've read, I don't want to say anything too harsh. I just feel like if you should read that article, I think it does show some silver linings of what's happening this year. But I also think it's extremely misleading, and it's really picking specific factors and highlighting those and trying to show, see, look at this month, not really looking at the overarching trends, kind of glancing over some really critical things that have been happening that have been affecting us and have been affecting shippers. So, but he did highlight a couple positive things. So, still this lane seeing numbers in the 1700 range is brutally low, brutally low. But yeah, there's a lot of things feeding into this, but one of the things going on is happening with the ILA, and that is our Longshoremen Association. So the ILA in Charleston, they've got support of union members nationwide. ILA in Charleston, this is our Longshore Association, and they're leading a protest against the state and the South Carolina Port Authority, also known as SCPA, for the use of non-union state employees at the Hugh K. Leatherman Terminal. That terminal opened back in 2021. And really, what's interesting about the East Coast is we saw this negotiation beginning, and it was beginning when the ILWU was finding another round of heat. We had slowdowns, we had strike situation, and it was really kind of spooky for us. We're like, oh no, we got the issue in the West Coast, and here comes the East Coast. But it actually went very quietly, as it generally did, as the ILWU did in the past. Just the fear of both East and West Coast closure was great, but relatively quiet. Now, really, they're getting kind of vocal about this, and this kind of situation that's going on in this protest, it's really the first public acknowledgement of the ILA's views on how it's going to expand throughout the East Coast. So what this is showing is that they would like to, and they plan on expanding into the Port of Savannah's Garden City and also the ocean terminals. And the ILA believes they've got the jurisdiction over those facilities. So, obviously I was just talking about the South Carolina Port Authority, but obviously talking about Savannah, now we're dealing with the Georgia Ports Authority. And the Georgia Ports Authority, or the GPA, they believe they've got jurisdiction over Garden City and ocean terminals. And currently they're investing more than 1.15 billion to expand the ocean terminals. They handle containers, they handle break bulk cargo, but also the GPA is spending $260 million on upgrades at specifically Berth 1 in Garden City. And it actually just so happens to be the largest marine terminal in the North American East Coast. So, why has this become a flashpoint issue? It's a little bit challenging, but why is it happening at both Charleston and Savannah and also in Wilmington? And why the ILA is coming out about this and why they're talking about non-union employees is all of these facilities use this hybrid labor model for their longshore workforce. The union workers will be performing certain jobs, and that includes maintenance, that includes repair, that includes clerical duties. But then you also have state employees, and the state employees are actually the ones who are going to be operating the cranes or performing the on-dock work. So you could really go on and on about this. But this is going to be heating up over the next few weeks. ILA could be even, positioning themselves for a strike. That being said, it really does seem like the situation is very different from the West Coast to the East Coast here. And in the East Coast, these ports seem to have some actually solid grounding in past agreements that they're pointing to and contracts that prove that they made these deals. And the reason why the ILA is included in these ports is for these specific reasons. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this actually bubbles up. And also, given the fact that they use these hybrid labor forces and the way those labor forces are kind of, separated, I'm going to be interested to see how effective these strikes are in comparison to how effective they were on the West Coast. But more on that in the coming weeks. Right now, it's not really at that flashpoint like we are seeing in the LTL market and obviously in Canada as well. Now, want to talk a little bit more about the Georgia Port Authority. We talked a little bit about this, but so the Georgia's Port of Brunswick, they're actually narrowing the gap with the nation's top automotive port, as for the growth rate of imported vehicles that are coming into the nation. So the conventional and still actually the leading port for these roll-on, roll-off vessels full of vehicles is the Port of Baltimore. But if you look at the months between January and April, Brunswick saw this 18.4% year over year jump in automotive imports. And then on the flip side, Baltimore grew only 2.8% during that same period. That being said, Baltimore still outpaced them by about 75,000 TEUs. I actually removed some of those numbers just specifically because we're getting a little bit in the weeds here. But, that being said, the Georgia Port Authority is really betting on this volume to be increasing, and they really want to overtake Baltimore. And so they are doing that. And I mentioned this earlier, that $260 million expansion, that's actually happening for this reason, for the roll-on, roll-off cargo. And they're also expecting right now, they're going to be increasing the capacity at Brunswick from 1.2 million to 1.4 million per year. So very interesting. Automotive is also having a little bit of a shining moment, and we should dive into that soon. Now, there's been a ton of other things going on, but we really, really should move on to make sure we stay on time. So let's talk about our last major shipping lane we like to talk about on this show, at least ocean-wise, and that is our Southeast Asia, China to Europe shipping lane. And a few weeks ago, I mentioned that we had seen a relatively massive drop in the price of this lane. And, that was true, but really when you look at the dollars and cents, it wasn't too big. It was more of a wow percentage, but the cost of this lane has been, really, quite honestly, extremely affordable. And it's been that way for a very long time now, the whole year, and actually a little bit beyond. We saw some a lot of instability right around the end of last year, the beginning of this year, but then just, rock bottom prices since. Now, we did see an increase from week to week back in the first week of July, but literally all of that increase has been erased in the weeks since. And right now, our customers are paying around $1,250 per shipment in this lane. But like I've mentioned before, we see the standard deviation happening in this lane, and really it's had a tough time. It hasn't broken 1,400 a TEU, and it hasn't gotten below 1,150 a TEU since the beginning of the year. Roughly, there's a little bit of a blurry point when we're looking at Chinese New Year, but right afterwards we've got this relative stability, and it's still you have to view it as what it is. It's still a very price dependable lane. Now we did touch on some things going on. Obviously, that East Coast market and the US East Coast market is kind of, affected by the European market. But I want to mention a couple other things. So the market in general, as we've discussed with demand, has been sluggish, and especially sluggish actually in this China to Europe lane if we look post the Ukraine crisis. Blank sailings on this lane, they've hit some highs. And actually, the lowest point we saw in a very long time was the summer of 2021 when some of those restrictions were lifting. China had their own restrictions that were going on, and we saw this kind of surge of cargo, a very low number of blank sailings. Well, funny story, we just hit our lowest level of blank sailings in this lane this month as well. Now, what's interesting about that is, despite that being the lowest number of blank sailings, we are still seeing out of this lane falling volumes. We're also seeing carriers saying that they're not expecting the normal seasonal uptick. So we're not expecting the uptick that we normally get during the peak season months. And also, we have capacity trickling in to all of these lanes as well. So it is a very curious situation that we are right now hitting the lowest number of blank sailings since 2021. Another thing going on right now is that in June, China reported a 12.4% contraction in their exports. Now, there was a story that came out discussing China's manufacturing PMI. So just so you know, and I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but the Purchasing Managers Index, but it pointed to a series of internal challenges that the country's been facing, and that's been ranging from a challenging job market, also new and rising deflationary issues, but in general, it's just less economic optimism. Now, what we're seeing is we've got this glut of capacity and it's impacting the spot market. And, there's exchanges out there such as the Shanghai Shipping Exchange and also the Drewry's World Container Index. And they're basically showing that the spot rates right now on our Southeast Asia, China to Europe shipping lane, they are below the 2019 levels. And then we still have this inverted rate where if you're not shipping all the way over to Europe, your shipping lane or your shipping costs for stopping a little bit early is inverted. It's more expensive than in 2019. So interesting figure that's been happening for quite some time now. Let's dive into our air markets. And there was a fantastic article that came out talking about the FOMO effect that's occurring in air, the fear of missing out effect, and how carriers are now altering their pricing because they don't want to see volume shift. Volume feels scarce, and so they want to capture it. So let's first take a look at the air rates when we're shipping out of that Southeast Asia region, China, into the US. So looking specifically at spot rates from Northeast Asia to the US, we saw a rise in month over month of 3% in the cost. And staggeringly, if you look at the year over year cost increase, it was a rise of 49%. But when we're looking at that month over month, we were talking about the first month. If we dial into our current rate averages in July, we're actually at roughly $3.94 a kilo currently, which is very low for this year so far. It's a considerable drop from where the month started out at $4.50 a kilo. Now we can also flip to the other coast. If we look at our European neighbors in the east, we see another story. So rates are down 14% month over month and 45% year over year. And this is bringing our weekly averages down to just $1.81 a kilo. It's a great time to ship air if you need to ship air, but it's an even better time to ship our consolidation program. So keep that in mind. Now, finally, let's talk about oil and gas just briefly. But as far as, diesel is concerned for carriers, prices are great right now. And, we're actually seeing some stable footing for the first time and stable footing at a great price. So for the diesel specifically, average across the U.S. has been about $3.80 for the past 2 weeks. If we go back 3 weeks, it was at $3.76. So we saw a slight rise, but some stable footing. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a mouthful. I hope you learned a lot. Now, that being said, there's a lot of points I touched on. We need to dive deeper into those points. I think one of the big takeaways today was right in the beginning, talking about what's going on with LTL. You've got to be prepared if you're shipping LTL in the US. And it doesn't even matter if you're shipping, not shipping via Yellow or if you're not shipping via UPS. If your current carrier will be constrained from this capacity shift, particularly if both go in a strike situation. My expectation is that UPS will be able to find some means to kind of push the strike off, but Yellow is looking very ugly at the moment. So 24th was the strike date for Yellow. Mark that down. Make sure you're prepared. Anyway, I appreciate everybody for joining today. Thank you so much. If there's anything you want to know more about, you want to hear more about in the future episodes, please let me know. Make it a great week.